Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to take a look at an upcoming Anbernic device called the Win600. Now obviously I do not actually have this device in my hands, but the company has teased it for a couple months now, and I think we have enough data and images to make a good speculation video. And so that's what we're going to do here today. And the whole reason why I'm interested in making this video in the first place is I do think this device has a special place in the handheld market. And we'll get into that here in a minute, but before we get started, I did want to give a couple caveats. The first is that this is a speculation video, which means it's going to be about 50% guesswork. We have some images and video footage, which is going to be pretty cool, but it's not going to give us everything about the device. And the second is that this device, the Win600, is still in development. And so it may end up being that some of these factors do change over time. But all the same, I'm kind of excited to pick apart the details we have right now and make some guesses as to what we'll see in the future. Okay, so I'm going to break this up into different chapters, and the first one here is going to be why the Win600 matters. And a lot of this actually comes down to a video that I made a week or two ago. And in that video I put Windows on the AYN Odin. Now, putting Windows on an ARM-based device like the Odin is actually an inherently compromised experience. And that's because the ARM version of Windows is limited to 32-bit apps, and even then compatibility isn't that great. And I know everyone's kind of going nuts over the Steam Deck right now, but personally I think there is a market for a lower-end x86 Windows handheld. If we can get something at the $200 to $300 price range that can play like Windows-based indie platformers, that's going to be a really awesome experience. And if that device can be widely available, like more available than the Steam Deck for example, then I think it could be a runaway success. And so that's why I'm hoping that the Win600 can be a budget-based Windows handheld that obviously won't be able to play AAA games, but will still be able to play hundreds of lower-tier PC games. Next, let's talk about components and features. Now, Anbernic recently released a video about the device, and in it they showed the device running both Windows 10 and SteamOS. And so to me, that video actually indicated quite a few things. Number one, the Windows experience seemed to be quite snappy, which to me means that it might have a pretty good chip and a decent amount of RAM inside. And number two, the fact that it can also run SteamOS is an indication to me that it's going to be an AMD-based chip. Because right now, the unofficial build of SteamOS that was probably running on this device only runs on AMD chips. So personally, I love the versatility of having two different operating systems here, and I think for a low-powered PC, AMD is the way to go too. Now let's take a look at a couple photos from this device here. First thing you're probably going to notice is it has that trademark kind of Anbernic style to it. Both of the analog sticks are here at the bottom, we'll talk about that more later on, but everything else seems to be similar. There is a home button on the left underneath the D-pad, and there's also a Windows button on the right underneath the face buttons. And as you can see altogether with these flared bottoms here, we're looking at about 23 centimeters altogether, which is a little bit under 9 inches. Now looking at the height of the device, it looks to be about 10 centimeters or something like 4.5 inches altogether. Here's a comparison against the RG552. As you can see, it's quite a bit bigger. We'll get into more detail with the size comparison here in a moment. But one thing I do want to point your attention to is that it looks like this is a 16:9 display. The red box that you see here is 16:9. And judging from the size of the RG552 screen below, which is about 5.4 inches altogether, I would say the Win600 is going to have a display that's between 6 and 7 inches. So in terms of thickness, we're looking at about 3 centimeters, so a little bit more than an inch. And as you've probably noticed, the device itself doesn't sit flush with the surface. And that's because, thankfully, finally, Anbernic has decided to use stacked shoulder buttons. And so here's a picture from their most recent engineering sample. Other things to note here, it has active cooling, as you can see by the exhaust vent here at the top. And it also has USB-C as well as USB-A inputs. Now, when Anbernic filed a patent for the device, they did show off some other renders, so these are older renders, but as you can see on the bottom, it looks to have stereo speakers as well as a headphone jack. And then from that same set of renders, you can see the other sides here. We have power button and volume, just like their other devices, but then also a toggle between mouse and gamepad mode, and what looks to be an on-screen keyboard prompt as well. So yeah, altogether it looks like the Win600 is going to have some unique components to it. But next, let's talk about size and ergonomics. Now, Anbernic recently teased with this video here, which is like a fake unboxing of the device itself. And as you can see in the hands, it does look quite big. And so what I want to do for this next segment here is compare it against other devices and kind of get a good idea. Using the pictures that we showed earlier, I ended up making this cardboard mock here. And so this can give us a good idea when it comes to size comparisons of other devices. We'll start with something much smaller like the RG351P. This one has a 3.5 inch screen, and as you can tell, it's about maybe 2/3 the size of the Win600 altogether. Let's move up to the RG552, which we already saw in a comparison photo earlier. And all around, this one seems to be quite a bit smaller. I would say 3/4 of an inch shorter, and then maybe about an inch more narrow as well. The Nintendo Switch Lite is a little bit bigger than the 552, but not by much, and as you can see here, it's still quite a bit smaller than the Win600 as well. Now the OLED Switch is a little bit wider than the device, but not quite as tall either. So while this is a good comparison in terms of just overall size, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around the exact dimensions. I think a better example would be something like the AYN Odin. This one seems to be exactly the same width, but maybe about a ½ inch shorter altogether. But really, that's about it when it comes to the devices that I own that happen to be of similar or a little bit smaller size. But I do have a couple that are a little bit bigger. First, we're going to start with the Aya Neo 2021 version. And this one actually looks to be about the same height altogether, but the Win600 isn't quite as wide. Now, one thing to note, the dimensions of the screen here are actually 16 by 10. And so this one is actually a taller screen than what I'm expecting from the Win600. And same thing with the Aya Neo Next, it has the exact same screen. And this one's about the same height as well, but a little bit wider than the Aya Neo 2021 version. And of course, king of them all is going to be the Steam Deck, and this thing is still quite a lot bigger than the Win600 is going to be. Again, in terms of height, they're about the same, but the width here is just kind of comically different. And so at the end of the day, it's kind of hard to tell whether or not the Win600 is going to be too big per se, but it's definitely not going to be a small device and not something I would say is pocketable in any way. My biggest worry about the Win600 is the placement of the analog sticks. One of the things that the Steam Deck does really well is that it puts its analog sticks near the top of the device. And this is a very comfortable experience. My worry is that by having the analog sticks both at the bottom like this, it's going to be unnatural to grip the device while trying to touch the shoulder buttons at the same time. And this phenomenon is something we've seen before. It's actually a problem that I've found with the RG552. And the RG552 is quite a bit smaller than the Win600 is going to be. And so my worry is that the grips that I don't really appreciate on the 552 are going to be even worse on the Win600. Now in that same video that Anbernic released the other day, they did show off some gameplay footage as you can see here. And in the footage, they are using analog sticks and shoulder buttons at the same time. But it's really kind of hard to tell whether or not this person finds this to actually be comfortable. And so sure, yeah, I think time will tell whether or not this is actually going to be ergonomic, but just based on my other experience with devices that have low analog sticks like this, I'm not really holding my breath. But that being said, I don't think it's going to be quite the end of the world, because by virtue of having the D-pad up top, it is going to work really well for games that do use the D-pad in the first place. And so as you can see in this footage here where they're playing Dead Cells primarily using a D-pad and face buttons, it actually looks quite comfortable. And given the fact that I'm hoping this device is really going to shine when it comes to indie platformer games and things like that, my hope is that we'll predominantly use this D-pad setup anyway. But all the same, it is kind of a bummer that I am a little bit worried about the ergonomics on this device, and I haven't even held it yet. And finally, let's talk a little bit about potential performance of this device. Now, of all these sections, this one's definitely the most speculative. I've heard rumors that there might be 2 chips available for this device, and both are going to be AMD chips, and the first one I've heard is the 3020E. Now, this is a dual-core chip that is used in a lot of budget laptops, and it runs a max TDP of about 6 watts. And so when it comes to very low-end AMD chips, this might be an option. But one that's a little bit higher on the spectrum is the 3050U. And this is the one I'm personally hoping is going to be in this device. This one's also dual-core, but it has a configurable TDP up to 25 watts. And so if you have that much wattage to work with, you might be able to find a good balance between performance and battery life as well. And about a year ago, ETA Prime did a video using a laptop with the same chip. And when it came to emulation with that laptop, he was able to play Dreamcast upscaled to 960p, PSP at a 2x resolution for God of War, which means that others will play at 3x no problem. And finally, he was also able to play GameCube and Wii at a native resolution for some of the harder games to play on those systems. So to me, that means if they end up using this chip, they're going to have something that's going to do some pretty good emulation. Now in this same video, PS2 didn't perform very well, but all the same, the ability to play GameCube on a handheld like the Win600 might be pretty awesome, especially if they're able to keep the price down to something like $250 or maybe even $200. And of course, the main draw for me here is the ability to play Windows games. And on that same chip, ETA Prime was able to play Skyrim at 720p with medium settings, and quite a few other PC games ran pretty well too. And on a device that has a 6 to 7 inch screen, 720p is actually going to be just fine of a resolution for handheld gameplay. And so what I'm hoping is that all these stars are going to align here with this device. We can get an AMD chip that'll allow us to play both Windows and SteamOS, and hopefully the chip will allow us to play both some pretty good emulation as well as some PC gaming. And on top of that, both the SteamOS and Windows are going to allow you to have a nice kind of user interface too. For example, here's the Ioneo Next running Big Box. And using this interface, I'm able to navigate through all my emulated systems as well as my PC games. And of course, the same thing can be done on SteamOS too. So altogether, I think there will be a good amount of variety to allow us to curate the device to be a dedicated handheld machine. But yeah, for now, that's about all I have to say about the Win600. I'm hoping we'll get more details here in the future to get a better idea of whether or not this is going to be worth our time. And so let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this something you'd be interested in picking up too? And what is the price point you think would be best for it? As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.